I think this is, one book is a really interesting thing. We're a library. That's what we're about. We're about the books here, that there's something that reflects every single person in this room. There's something that you're going to enjoy. There's something that you're going to want to share with other people. Once a year, we're about one book. Why? Why one book? It's because of the power of shared stories. That's what this is about tonight. If you've ever been in a book group, if you've ever sat down with a friend over a cup of coffee and talked about how excited you are about that book that you just finished, that's the power of shared stories. One Book Chelmsford got started about 18 years ago because of the vision of our former director, Becky Herman. And she really believed, because she could see it happening, that a community that reads together is stronger and is more connected. And we have one book so that we can celebrate those connections, the connections that we have with each other here tonight and with all the people you may have talked about this wonderful book with since you read it. Other than that, I get to say thank you. So I want to say thank you to our wonderful Chelmsford Friends of the Library. You may not know, the Friends of the Library is a wonderful group of extremely hardworking volunteers. Some of you may have gone to the book sale this past weekend. Our Chelmsford Friends of the Library raised over $22,000 at that book sale. They get a huge round of applause for that. The Friends of the Library pay for more than 3/4 of the programs that we're able to offer here at the library, including purchasing 500 copies of our one book title every single year, so that members of our community can have that title for free, can share it with others that they know. So I do encourage you to become a friend of the library. There's always room for more, and our Friends of the Library do great work. There are advocates in the community, and we would love to have you come on board and be a part of that fabulous group. A huge thank you to our maintenance crew, Al and Mike and Jeff. You may see Jeff around. He's really tall. They put our stage together, they move all the chairs, they keep everything running smoothly. We just could not do these events without their hard work. Certainly a thank you to the entire staff, with a special thank you to our One Book team. Alyssa and Julie's back there giving you raffle tickets. So hopefully you've done a survey and gotten a raffle ticket. So we could not do everything that we do without all the hardworking people here at the library who just go above and beyond. So thank you, Julie and Alyssa. And thank you to CTM, Chelmsford Telemedia, for always spreading these kind of great events far and wide. They're here recording tonight, so this will be available probably in about a week or so. So if you know folks who weren't able to attend, please point them in that direction. And then I also have to thank and introduce Jill Kenny, who's now giving me a look. So Jill Kenny is our head of Reader Services and Adult Programming here at the library. And she has worked so hard coordinating the committee to bring this event together. And she is someone who's probably the most passionate person about reading that I have ever met. So I am so grateful for her work, her leadership on this project. So thank you. Here's Jill Kenny.
Well, thank you. Is this on? Okay, good. No feedback for me. So thank you so much to Leslie. She ran away. And a warm welcome to everyone here this evening. I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the committee again, because I can't do it alone, for their fantastic work on selecting the book we're discussing tonight. This seems like I can't believe this is actually here. We started talking about this last summer. So this is very exciting. A special shout out goes to Lala Books in the back, our partner They have the books available and also first book. We're going to talk about that. I also want to thank CTM, making it possible for us to record tonight's program, which you'll be able to catch up on soon. But before we dive into our conversation, I'd like to mention a couple of things. After our discussion, we'll have a Q&A session, and we've got microphones ready that we don't want you to be shy about asking questions, but we do need you to use the microphone so that everybody can hear. So if we're in your face, we really need you to ask the questions. So following the Q&A, Ilyon will be back at the table by Lala Books to be signing for you if you'd like to stop and say hello and get a book signed. Yes, if you filled out a survey when you came in, you've been entered into a raffle, which is exciting, and we'll announce the winner during that time after. If you didn't get a chance to fill out the survey on your way in, no worries. There will be time at the end. We're going to take about 10 minutes for anyone who didn't get a chance to be able to fill out that survey. Now, you don't want to hear me talk anymore. Let me introduce our three speakers this evening. First, we have Michael Pierson, who has been a professor of history at UMass Lowell for over 25 years. Michael teaches courses in 19th century American history, American women's history, and historical methods. He is the author of 4 books, including his most recent work, The Wild Woman of Cincinnati, which tells the fascinating story of the woman exhibited as a supposedly feral person in 1856. Next, we're joined by Keith Mitchell, who's associate professor at English at UMass Lowell. I don't know how I'm going to do in your class.
Better than some of my students, probably.
Keith teaches courses in American and African American literature, as well as special topics on 19th century American literature and the Harlem Renaissance. He's currently working on 2 book projects, an edited collection of essays on Tosimble Everett, and a monograph exploring African American literature and the Vietnam War. Finally, we are honored to have with us Ilyon Woo, a Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times best-selling author of Master Slave, Husband, Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom, which was named one of the 10 best books of 2023 by the New York Times and featured in People's Magazine Top 10 Books of 2023. Her book has garnered widespread acclaim from outlets like The New Yorker, Time, and NPR. Ilyon is also the author of The Great Divorce, which tells the story of a 19th century mother's extraordinary fight against her oppressive circumstances, which is also for sale in the back. She has been featured speaker at bookstores, festivals, and on programs such as NPR's Morning Edition and CBS Sunday Morning. So we're thrilled to have her speaking with us tonight. With that, I will pass it over to Keith.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you all for allowing us to be in this wonderful library. It's a beautiful, beautiful library, and to see the wonderful support that all of you bring to it is just it's just astonishing, right? That people still read and love read, right? Michael and I came up with a series of questions under various categories for Ilyon, and we're going to go back and forth between the categories, and I'm going to start. The first category is about Ilyon's research approach and writing style. So the first question, Ilyon, for you is, how did you decide what narrative techniques you would employ in the biography to make the craft story engaging and emotionally impactful?
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here and for the honor of reading my book together. I mean, it is truly amazing, and it's amazing to be in this beautiful space. I actually, I go to so many different historic spaces. I'm the daughter of an architect. I'm very attuned to spaces. And this one feels so creatively alive. Like if I lived here, I would be writing here every day. It's so wonderful. So you're so lucky to have this space. I feel so lucky to be here in this amazing company to talk about this story and to talk about narrative and this first question of yours. How I guess like I've shaped or written the book in this particular way. And I guess for me, here's a little secret. I don't generally read history for fun. Like I don't, and especially, not biographies. I read biographies, I devour them if I need them, but I love a story. Like I love novels. I want to be immersed in a different world, and I want to have the story and the characters pulling me forward. So that really was my goal with this book, to write a story that had all the research and all this stuff that I dug up around the crafts, to elevate them and their story, but to have it move forward more like a novel or like a movie or like a play or something else that really keeps you at the edge of your seat, because that's really what I felt like when I first found the story of the crafts. I felt like I was at the edge of my seat, and I wanted to do something that would enhance that experience.
Yeah. When Ilyan talks about her narrative process and creating this beautiful story, when I talked to her for the first time, I said, you know, it really reads like a novel, right? A beautiful novel. And, you know, the cliffhangers at the end of each chapter just pushes you forward. And, you know, a small secret, I don't read a whole lot of nonfiction, right? I'm an English professor, so I teach and read a lot of fiction. But this biography actually felt more like a novel, and that really drew me in a lot. I'm sure that did it for you guys also. The next question is, the extraordinary amount of research that you did in completing this book is evident. Could you please discuss your writing and research process? What inspired you to choose this topic, and when did you decide to pursue it? How much travel were you required to undergo, and what were some of the most compelling places that you visited? And finally, please briefly discuss some of the more important people that you discovered in writing this.
Okay. So many great questions.
First, we'll talk about the research.
My brain is really kind of, I mean, this is how I research too, is like there will be one rabbit that I jump after, I like go down that rabbit hole, and then sometimes you just have to pull me out. So if you need to pull me out, pull me out.
All right.
So let's start with the first, I think the first people I really have to give huge credit to, and who every time I speak, it's really to honor them, is Ellen and William Craft, who not only made this incredibly brave escape from slavery, but went on the road to talk about it. And not only that, but when they're hunted down, they're standing up. And not only that, but when their loved ones are still in bondage, they are writing the story down. I mean, this is at huge, you who've read the story know this, what incredible danger they were in. They were basically putting a target on their back. And if they didn't have, if they hadn't done that, you know, we wouldn't know about them today. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't have this story to write. So for me, the story really began in an English class, much like those that you teach. Ooh. Yes, and I understand there's some awards here too for your teaching. Okay. So I was in a class where the crafts narrative, it's about 60 pages long, was assigned reading. Have any of you read the original Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom? You can check it out of the library.
Yes, you can.
Yes. There's actually a new edition that comes with an introduction from the Crafts' great-great-granddaughter. It's wonderful, by the Savannah College of Art and Design. But anyway, that narrative. So I was reading at that time. I was in grad school, and I was reading a lot of lit theory. Mm-hmm. So half the time I was in this graduate program, I was like, I thought I was here because I wanted to read stories, but I'm reading about stories. But once in a while, you get the story itself. And I was in this dark space. I remember at that point there were like photocopied pages.
Yeah.
Now I'm sure we'd be reading the digital version. But I just remember feeling like I could hear, it was like having the story spoken, right? Sometimes when you read something, and this happened with my first book too, that feels so powerfully, urgently told, to me, it feels like I'm hearing it. And you know, the story that crafts tell, it's pretty fast and it's pretty action-packed. And they tell you where they're moving from, and they tell you the broad contours of their experience, their loss as children. But they don't go into the details. And I was left wanting to know. I was left wanting to know, especially about their lives in bondage, who they had left behind, whether they were reunited with these people, what happened afterwards, and then just sort of like the nitty-gritty of how did they do this, right? How did they get the idea? What did it feel like to put on these clothes? Like, where did they get these clothes? How did everything work? How did they know where to go? All these things, like those intimate details were sort of, big questions. And that's really what, I guess about 20 years later, that's what started pulling me into the rabbit hole of the archives. And you all have been there. When you fall in and when you start doing, I mean, it's like detective work.
Yeah.
It really is. There's that sort of level of suspense and mystery and the eureka moments when you're finding, like little bits of information that tell you more about the people you're writing about. Or in my case, I wanted to know especially about Ellen having been given away by her father, her biological father, to her half-sister. And when I was sitting in the Bibb County Courthouse, upstairs in this very weird space that I had no place going, but it was one of the many times when somebody just gave me a free pass and said, all right, you can go upstairs. And I have all these these deed books open, and I'm opening this page and I'm finding, in this beautiful 19th century penmanship, the gifting of one daughter to another by a shared biological father. And James Smith is writing, when I've done visual presentations with this, because actually the visual sources are incredibly rich here too, I always zero in on this one word, because I bet you'll never guess this one word that jumps out on this page, on this legal document. James Smith says that it's for the love and goodwill that he has for his daughter, Eliza Collins, that he's giving her this property. Wow. So it's that word love that really pulled me in. And it's those kinds of moments that made me feel like there is so much around the story that I want to pull together into sort of the equivalent of, not so much a novel, I was thinking at that point. But I wanted to create an orchestral score to sort of, we have the melody that the Crafts wrote, but how to summon the world around that.
Yeah, and you really do emphasize the love story between William and Ellen in the novel, and I think that's really compelling. And just a short tangential question is, two of my colleagues are Andre Debuse. Maybe some of you know Andre's work at UMass Lowell. He's a teacher at UMass Lowell. And Maureen Staunton. Also, she's a nonfiction writer from Massachusetts. I remember one day asking Andre, I was like, so what is your writing process and what's your ideal, writing situation? And he's like, well, I have this man cave in my basement, and I go every morning. He writes every day for a couple of hours every morning, regardless of where he is. So I was going to ask you, what's your ideal writing situation, and did you experience that in writing this book?
Yeah, thank you. I love the process questions too, and I would throw them back at you as well. But for me, I should step back and say that, what you're reading here is like the top of that Hemingway iceberg in many, many different ways. But one of the ways in which it is the top is that there was a lot of bad writing and unsuccessful writing that came before what you see in the final book. It was really bad. It was so bad that I'll take a deep breath.
Okay.
It was so bad that when I reread the email recently, I thought, enough time has passed. I think I can read the email that my editor sent me. I think maybe not enough time has passed. So the part that I highlight for students is so this is like a 6-page letter that she wrote. And the first, the professors always say in the beginning, here's what you did well, right?
Right, yeah.
So that was like a phrase. She had told me that I did a staggering amount of research, like and that I don't think that was quite a compliment,
Oh.
But she said that I had created, I had written a scholarly tomb.
Oh.
Yeah, not scholarly tome,
A tome.
but scholarly tomb.
Right.
Yeah. And that I basically, it was a place of death, and I had to rebirth. Let's just put it that way. So I had to start completely from scratch again, and that is when I did really start looking to novels, because I thought, what I'm trying to do here, she's telling me the story is not moving. She was also telling me, so what had happened is I began the story that I gave her with William standing on the steps of the Bibb County Courthouse, having just seen his sister be auctioned and about to be sold himself. So it is the beating heart of the story, his loss and Ellen's, which is less clearly articulated in their own voice. So I felt like, all right, we need to put that front and center. And she said, no, we cannot put that front and center because we don't care enough about the characters yet. And what I had done was I highlighted that moment, and then I was like, all right, in order to understand how we get here, let's go back and see the historical situation. And that's when she's like, I've lost you, right? So what she said, she's the one who said you have to start in the moment, that action, that moment when they're just about to bolt out, when they're in the cabin at 4 a.m. in Macon, Georgia. And that is the beating heart of the action of the story. But the problem is, if you start there, is I found all this stuff, right? Like all this stuff about the enslavers, all this background information. How do you start in the middle and then work all that stuff in?
Right.
And she's like, you just have to do it at the same time. And I was like, how the heck do you do that? So I had a lot of versions where I just, the story would be going along, and then I would just stuff it with, right, with all the stuff that you needed to know. And she's like, no, that's not it. So I ended up I was like, all right, there's got to be a better way. And that's where I look to novels, because you don't have, like in a sci-fi book, you don't have, all right, I don't read science fiction, much of it, so I can't give you a clear example, but you don't say, all right, I'll do the Hunger Games. You don't start the book by saying, all right, we are in District 12, and Katniss Everdeen is this girl who's really good at hunting, and she is going to be one of a number of kids who are going to be picked for this thing, blah, blah, blah. I mean, who's going to read that, right? You start the ground running with her on this morning, and she's reaching out, and she's expecting to feel her sister, who's shares the bed with her, and that automatically you see how close they are, right? But that expected warmth is not there, and she realizes right away, Prim is with their mother. And you feel the distance between Katniss and her mother and the closeness to her sister and the sense that something bad is going to happen on this day. Right? So she pulls you into it and she covers everything. Eventually you learn about the capital, you learn about the districts, you learn how the Hunger Games are played. But that's not all explained to you in that scholarly tomb-like edifice that I had originally constructed. So I wasn't studying the Hunger Games at that time. That book is alive in my mind because I just read it. My kids just read the latest version of it. And I'm actually studying it to see how that works because there is definitely kind of a magic going on in there. But I did study Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad. I studied Toni Morrison's Beloved. I studied Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. They move in short, amazing chapters. Those are books where I thought the writing was so beautiful, and they pulled me into a world, and yet I couldn't stop turning the pages. I've gone onto this massive rabbit hole, but back to your original question, in terms of the practice of it, that's really how I actually like to try to think about it, is a practice. So in this post-scholarly tomb desperation, I was reaching to novels, but I was also reaching out to any other art form that I could, including ones where I'd been trained. So I have been trained as a classical pianist. And for me, I hated practicing piano, oh my God. But I do love the practice of writing. And I've borrowed that discipline for this discipline, which is actually fun.
All right, thank you.
All right, hi. How am I doing in terms of the back row? Are we doing okay? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ilyan, for being here and for writing this very suspenseful book. And I just want to say, as a historian, you've managed to resist the lure of pointing out every time you're telling your reader something that you know and no one else does. That, look, I found this.
Right, yes.
Because it took me a little while to realize, because I had read the original book by the Crafts, it took me a little while to realize just exactly how much you had learned about them that nobody else knew. And there's a modesty to this book which sort of can allow you to underestimate just exactly how much you have unearthed about this. But I wanted to, my job here is to ask questions about the escape itself, sort of the first half of the book, first third. And when we were thinking about this, we were thinking that this escape is unlike others. Usually when someone who is enslaved in the American South looks to escape, they try to avoid they try to avoid the enslavers, they try to avoid white people. The Crafts have to interact with white people. And as they interact, there's a lot of dramatic tension. Is this going to be the moment when they're found out? But there's also irony and there's also humor that comes out of these encounters. The most obvious one, perhaps, when the young woman falls in love with Ellen. How, as a writer, did you decide to balance the need for tension and danger in a plot, which is very real, with the relief that humor can give us?
Thank you for that question. Well, that's the humor and the irony, that is all about the Crafts. And I think it's one of the reasons why they were such effective storytellers. And they were speaking actually not that far from here. They were speaking in Lowell. They were speaking all across Massachusetts and New England. And they had people crying, but they also had them in stitches, because there are some moments that are very suspenseful and kind of, I mean, the irony is just so resonant that people would laugh. So in terms of balancing that, I mean, I think that's part of what made it interesting to write. And if anything, what I felt like I needed to do to sort of brace against those moments is to make sure that readers were aware at every moment of what is straining against that. So if they are on a tightrope, we can cover all the razzle dazzle, and there are lots of sort of funny moments that people are writing about. But if we're not aware of the abyss into which they could fall at any possible moment, then we are not getting the full scope of their heroism and their bravery. And I think also what happens when you illuminate what's below as well as what's above, that actually naturally creates suspense. That was not the goal of doing that, but I think what that does is it makes you realize if they could fall at any point, will they fall? How will they make it through, right? So I guess going back to the music and the practice of music, I think just trying to, like, if I'm a conductor, cue up the right voices at the right moments, and also to make sure that I have like panoramic views or larger views that show some of those darker colors, even while the bright notes come through. That's what I was going for.
And I think we're very successful. I want to focus a little bit on Ellen Craft, and this is going to be a question eventually about disguise, and in particular, I just want to say that I think Ellen Craft is amazing and gives what I would consider to be the single most impressive acting job I know of in the 1800s, that she is a woman pretending to be a man. She's enslaved and she's pretending to be free and in fact a master. She's a poor person impersonating a rich person. She's African American and she's pretending to be white. She's pretending all of these things. And I just want to say, she must at some point also have, at this moment, talked authoritatively to her husband. So there's all these disguises going on. I don't know of anybody else who does that much acting in a single moment. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to ask about the power of disguise, about deception, about performance, and how they can be used for survival at first, and then liberation, finally, and what this tells us about the performances that are given daily by both enslaved and free African Americans in this time period. What is it about being enslaved that trains a person to be an actor?
Thank you for that question. And actually, we're all in luck that the Metropolitan Museum of Art actually has a new exhibit planned this spring on exactly this. Black dress and disguise also in it. And so actually I've been recently reading about this, so I would definitely point you to that. It opens in May. And it so happens very appropriately that they are going to include an image of Ellen Craft in that original, actually it's not the original disguise, I'll talk about that, but in disguise, there'll be the frontispiece of their 1860 narrative will be part of that exhibit, and it looks like it will be amazing. But I will say about that disguise, because this is a really fun rabbit hole for me, but when you look at that disguise in the image, it looks like, and scholars have written about how she was wearing a tartan sash and tassel. There's like this kind of like checkered print if you go look at it, and you can see it. I have a link to Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom in my on my website in a resources section, so you can see that right away. She's got the hat. She doesn't have the poultices on her face, but she does have her arm in a sling. And we literary critics love to analyze things and love to take apart images, right?
Yeah.
But in this particular case, what I learned was that I learned from one of the Quaker descendants that Ellen Craft had actually thrown out that original costume. She was too scared to have that near her as soon as she got to the North. So what you're seeing in that disguise, it's just an approximation. And I was like, oh, then is it different from what she actually wore? And I did two things. One is I talked to a friend who is just like the authority on dress from this period. So she could take a look at your glasses or like earrings in a photo, accessories, anything, and she can date a 19th century image like within about 5 years, just by looking at those trends. Just like we would, let's say, look at feathered hair and be like, oh, that has to be the 1980s, right? So she can do that. She's like, that's for the 1880s or the 1780s. So she was looking at that tartan sash and tassel that I wanted to know more about, and she said, that is not a sash. That is just the lining of her coat turned inside out. So then that also made me really think. That was one revelation, but then the fact that it wasn't even the original jacket. Then you have to go to the literary sources. How are they actually describing elements of this disguise? And what it turns out is that what she was wearing, the coat and the vest especially, these were all ready-made. So in that era, actually, if you're a really high-class gentleman, you're getting things fitted to your body. You're not wearing things that are like 10 sizes too big, which is really what she had to do, because she had to wear whatever William could bring back. And so she's wearing this vest in particular that it's like down to her hips. She's very small. That's another thing that I learned from a description of her that Robert Collins actually wrote, and it's actually at the National Archives, and you can access that too from my website if you want to go down another rabbit hole. But so she's wearing this vest that's too big. Everything is off except for her pants, which I know she sewed them herself, and I imagine she sewed them herself because she's not going to be able to get a pair of pants that are small enough. William is panicked when he sees her because everything is so off. What this tells me is, when people are describing her afterwards, like William Still and others are saying, oh, she was so stylish, she was just, first class. She actually did not look stylish. I had 2 costume experts read the descriptions, and they're like, she's going to look a little bit weird. And she smells kind of funny because she's got these poultices on her. She's not really the kind of person who young ladies are going to be falling in love with on the train, which tells us how well she performed. Like, she performed so well that she's giving them all the impression, as they're reflecting back on this years later, that she was dressed as a man of style. But that style was all her. So if we say that the clothes make the man, that's not true in this particular case. It was Ellen Craft.
Wow. All right. Thank you. All right. So the next question is about how the Crafts chose to tell their story. So in their narrative, Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom, published in 1860, William and Ellen Craft refrained from providing very many visceral and gory details about what they had to endure as enslaved people. And I was wondering if you might talk about maybe some of the reasons why they chose not to reveal more brutal and the realities of slave life, and what choice did you make about this issue, and why did you go that way?
Thank you. That's a difficult and thoughtful question. And I should begin by saying that they do describe, not in graphic detail, but they do close the book actually with a rather apocalyptic, I wish I had the lines at my fingertips, but view of American slavery and the kinds of things that they had witnessed. So they describe, and this is all done in William's voice because the narrative is actually credited to him and not to the two of them. But actually, now scholars credit it to both of them because he's describing in this first-person narrative voice things that that only she could have seen. So she must have been a co-author in the creation of this work. But in this singular voice, he does describe the things that they've borne witness to as anyone and everyone who was. Whether they experienced these things themselves, anyone in bondage was forced to bear witness to, which is the torture, the branding, the burning of people. so it is something that they do mention. They don't dwell on it. They don't go into the horrors as much as some of the abolitionist literature does. And neither do they explicitly talk about rape, but that is also a huge theme that they come back to again and again in the book. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is, they had to think about the audiences that they were speaking to and what people were ready to read and ready to receive. So Ellen Craft in particular was up against so much judgment for crossing all these lines that she did. And she had to walk an additional tightrope. And if you go into too much detail, even for her to have been near to things that would be considered scandalous, could potentially taint her and have people not be open to receiving her story. She did an amazing job, and I think it's also one of the reasons why she harnesses silence, her own silence, as a way to both sort of extricate herself from some of the details, but also call upon people's imaginations, people's own ability to sort of fill in the blanks. She does it, I think, in a really strategic and genius way.
One of the things that I've heard about this, we were in the history book group, which meets at the library every month, which you're all welcome to join. We were talking about, particularly the women in the group were talking about what it must have been like for her to walk into the men's cabin. In the steamships. And she doesn't really talk about that. She doesn't do all the graphic details that she might have, but that seems like a moment of deliberately chosen silence, where I'm simply not going to write about that.
Yeah, I mean, and you can't, because even just to be there, even to be wearing pants was scandalous. So you have William saying again and again in the narrative, my wife would not have, she really did not want to do this. She protested, she cried, she was helpless, and then she only after prayer, only after I persuaded her, did she finally agree to do this.
And I think it's important to note that in terms of slave narratives, that trope of not revealing the gory details. If you read Frederick Douglass's narrative or Harriet Jacobs's narrative, they are very silent when it comes to talking about brutalities, sexual assault, and things like that, because they do have to consider their audience. This is the Victorian era. No one wants to read these really gory, detailed things. But as you were saying, the Crafts do an amazing job of sort of allowing their readers to imagine, what went on during those terrible times. So yeah. Another question, a follow-up question, is about literacy, and that's another trope that you find in slave narratives: the importance of reading and writing, learning how to read and write, because it was illegal for slaves to learn how to read and write. Literacy was an essential goal for African Americans, perhaps even more so for enslaved African Americans. And why was literacy so critical to William and Ellen and their journey to freedom? When they're in England, it's just this insistence from the people that they meet: you will learn how to write, and they want to. But it's really emphasized.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge dream. And when you think about the fact that Ellen's biological father and her sister's husband were both involved in the creation of what is now Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia, I mean, this is a family that prized reading and prized education, prized learning. And it's one of the first things when she's asked in Boston, why Frederica Bremer, a writer, asks her, like, if your enslavers didn't treat you so badly, so that's a whole another thing that we could go into, but so badly is all relative, right? But if they didn't treat you so badly, then why did you want to escape? And her answer is, I wanted to learn. Like, they wouldn't let me learn to read and write. That's one of the first things that she wanted to do. And you see the power of the word and that information when you actually look into the travel, the reality of the travel in that era. So I have to confess that I have a terrible sense of direction. That was actually one problem. I mean, even just navigating my way over here, like without the GPS, I would have been just, I just followed that thing blindly. And they got me through the traffic. So when I looked at the travel guides from the period and the maps and the train schedules and all that kind of stuff, hundreds of pages of these things, and people would carry around these books, and you can look at them. They have them in the archives. You go to the American Antiquarian Society. They have these beautiful books with the maps look like completely veined over. You open them up and everything. They're nuts. Yeah. And even after studying these maps for hours, it was really hard for me to figure out how you went from one place to the next. To think that the Crafts were improvising all of this without any literacy is just extraordinary.
We're going into the section which we have labeled as reflections that are looking forward. And so one question that we had, and it comes directly out of the history book group. Did I mention the history book group and how you're all welcome to join us? We have a very good group of people. And this question came out of a comment by one of the long-term members. And she is, I just want to say this right off the bat, this woman is very smart, very well-read historically, not at all naive. She has no illusions, I think, about race relations in America, or in Boston, for that matter. But she said in the middle of a string of comments that she read this book and she was proud of Boston. And she was proud of the people of Boston. She's not naive. I'm sure she knows about Boston's busing history and all the rest of that, but she was proud of Boston. And I'm wondering how you feel about that. Because there is a new school of historical writing, which is the North is just like the South. And there's very little difference. There's pro-slavery people everywhere. There's white supremacist ideology, North and South. Is this a moment when we can feel proud of Boston, or maybe not?
That's a really interesting question. And I actually have to say, in terms of the general Boston history, the Pulitzer Prize winner for history this past year was by Jacqueline Jones, and it's called No Right to an Honest Living. So it actually covers many of the same years that I do, and it shows a darker side of Boston, how Black Americans they were given no right to an honest living. So you can see everything that's going on there. I think that's where the story is really an American story, right? There is so much to be proud of, but there's also so much to learn from, because we can't say there was one Boston. Yeah. And we can't say that Boston was not unified at this time. There were people, young men, who were ready to volunteer to help hunt the Crafts down. And the reality is this is much bigger than about just Boston. This was the law. The 1850 Fugitive Slave Act made it so that if there's a fugitive and you are called upon to essentially become part of a slave hunting posse to hunt down that person, you must do it. Or you will face prison, or you will pay a $1,000 fine, which is, that's a lot of money now. It's astronomical back then. So whether you were a Bostonian or a Charlestonian, it didn't matter. As an American, you had this duty. And there were Americans who said, this is not right, and we need to stand up. And there were Americans who stood up with the Crafts in the thousands, people of all colors, in Faneuil Hall. And when Frederick Douglass or when William Wells Brown or when others were exhorting them and doing this calling and response and saying, will you send them back or will you stand up with them? And you have the sound of this everlasting yea filling Faneuil Hall. That's what I think of now when I go into these spaces. And you have the crafts standing up there and hearing this ringing of Boston voices telling them, we are with you, right? Yeah. That makes me proud.
Thank you.
And I guess the final question before we have the Q&A, I often teach Frederick Douglass's narrative, and most people know Frederick Douglass, and a fair number of people know about Harriet Jacobs' slave narrative. So the question is, how was this story lost, and why don't more people know about William and Ellen Craft? Hopefully your book will rectify a lot of that. But how was this story lost, and why don't more people know about it?
Lost is an interesting word because I don't know if it was ever really lost. I want to acknowledge the descendants again. You can actually follow them on Instagram. You can follow William and Ellen Craft. That's the hashtag, the handle on Instagram. They have their own. They're starting a foundation. They've been sharing this story really since the 19th century. It's been nonstop. So there have been people who have been preserving and celebrating and sharing the story. And the Crafts' great-great-granddaughter with whom I appeared on the CBS Sunday Morning episode, Peggy Trotter-Damon Priestley. She's a poet, an oral historian, activist, a freedom writer, amazing. She always says, whether or not you've heard the story depends on sort of what stories you've had access to, and really like who you are. So what she emphasizes, there are people who have known the story, but there are also many who haven't, and that is sort of probably the dominant response that I get especially when I do events. I'm curious to know how many of you had heard of the Crafts before this book? Okay, that's great. So there are a number of people who have known the story. I'd be curious to know more too how you learned it. Some people I know have read the narrative. It's widely taught in schools. Yes.
Right.
Thank you. But in terms of the question of why we don't, as a nation, know the story, and so many others like it, right? As far as I'm concerned, this is an American story, and the Crafts are American heroes, and they were living out the values of the Declaration of Independence and the Bible, which they quote in the very opening lines of their narrative, right? So they should be celebrated as heroes, and they were for maybe not all universally celebrated, but they were in the public eye in 1850. Why was that not sustained? I think that has everything to do with what stories we're prepared to honor and to remember. And this one challenges us on so many different levels, with race, with class, with gender, with ability, all these issues that we're wrestling with now. So I feel like hopefully we're at an age where we can start to unpack not only the story, but our history with the story.
All right, thank you. So the next section is the Q&A section, and we definitely want to hear what you guys thought about the biography and your questions regarding the biography and the Crafts.
Okay, so we have Julie and Alyssa with microphones, so please raise your hand and they'll come and we can take questions one at a time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a multi-level, 3-level question because, that's the thing to do, obviously. One, I wanted to say I hadn't heard the story. My husband brought home the book, and I grabbed it from him, said I didn't know the story, read the whole thing in one night, one sitting. Then he read it, I don't have my copy to have you sign because I gave it to my mom and said, you have to read this. And some of the little things that I actually really liked, I liked the gossipy parts. Well, Douglas and Garrison were really friends until they went on a tour together. Then they really couldn't stand each other at the end.
Right.
I could see that happening. And the guy that they were touring with,
William Wells Brown. Yeah.
I want somebody to film this damn thing because the concept of he had this big rolling canvas and this is how I escaped and this is I had a picture in my head and like I had never heard of this before. So that was amazing.
Have you seen Bridgerton?
No.
Okay. Reggae Jean Page? William Wells Brown, don't you think?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay, that.
Wow.
Yeah, so I like the little. I know I have a minor in history for women's studies, and that a lot of the women's studies the nascent women's movement happened from they organized during abolition, and then when black men could vote. What about us? Never mind, you guys. So a lot of these characters were in the other narratives that I was reading about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all those folks. So it's like, oh yeah, that guy. Oh, that guy. Oh, that guy. That's a new guy. I didn't know that guy. Yeah. So I really appreciate this story, and I want to know why someone hasn't filmed it because it's so good.
Yeah.
And again, I appreciate it, and I look forward to more of your stuff.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't know about the filming part of it, but I will say that for me, actually, sort of thinking cinematically was a really big part of how I sat down to write the story. I think going back to one of your earlier questions about like how do you tell this, especially if you're not like stuffing it with all the history, right? How do you make that move forward? Cinema is the best way to do that, right? You don't have movies with sides where you're like explaining everything, right? You watch everything unfold. You watch that story unfold. So I actually studied screenplays, and I wrote actually. I don't know if you're familiar with log lines in screenplays. Yeah. So a log line is it's like a one-sentence synopsis of the movie. So every single movie you'll see in the theater has this. Like on such and such a day, so-and-so experiences this, like the worst moment of their lives, and they must blank or they will blank. So you can do that for horror, you can do that for rom-com, you can do it, it applies to any movie. So I wrote that for the whole book, and then I actually wrote it for each of the movements or sections of the book, and then I actually did that for every chapter. That sort of, like the archetype of cinema is really built into my book on a kind of a molecular level. So maybe somebody will see that one day.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hi. Oh. Is it on? Yes, it's on now. I listened to the last part of the book, and I was surprised that there were two people reading the book, a male and a female. Was that a choice that you made to have Ellen and William's voices be heard, or was that someone else's choice?
Oh, yes, it was. Thank you for pointing that out. I love the voice narrators. So one really exciting thing once you finish writing the book is they'll say, okay, here are the audio narrators, you can pick one. So they gave me a list of like 10 names, and as soon as I heard them, there's one in particular who jumped out, a woman's voice, Janina Edwards, who also happened to have voiced All That She Carried by Taya Miles, which I also highly recommend. And I sort of weave in that story, in Alan Craft's story. But to me, it felt like, how do you choose, right? It was originally called Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, an American love story, and I'm still attached to that title. They made me change it. But if you're gonna have a love story and you have two voices and it's a duet or a double concerto as I conceived of it, then which voice do you choose? If they had forced me to, I would have chosen the woman's voice, because I knew that Ellen Craft had to have that last word. But that's not how I wanted to do it. And that's when I asked. And shockingly, they said yes. So Leon Nixon was the other fantastic reader. And it just so happened that, like, when I mapped out the book, at first they were just going to have it cut down the middle. But I was able to sort of go back and forth in the sections, and it matched up so that it was the male voice who was reading. Like, I needed like a baritone for Douglas, right? You need a big, deep man's voice for Douglas and for Webster. And it worked out so that Ellen Craft was, anytime she came in, it was Janina Edwards. So that actually felt like a magical coherence, and I'm so glad you listened to it. Hi.
A two-part question. One would be, Ellen and William probably spoke hundreds of times after they moved, and yet it appeared they were broke most of the time. So were they taken advantage of financially, or do we know any about like how people were paid? And the other question would be, for all practical purposes, I would think they spent their entire life appearing to be an interracial couple. And how much did they suffer from that, or did they talk about that?
Oh, what an interesting question. Both parts of it. So the money part of it first, there is a treasury account. Francis Jackson has a treasury account at the Boston Public Library. So you can see little traces of what happened in terms of funding, later at least for their travels. We don't know the nitty-gritty details of when they were on the road. But there again, too, Ellen Craft is like walking this line with gender and with race. There's also class and money that they have to deal with, because they're not allowed. It seems people don't want them to be asking for money. So they are asking for money. These are fundraising things. They're putting around the abolitionist coffer that goes around at every lecture, but they can't seem too interested in money. So it's hard, right? They need that money, and they want to raise that money, but they can't speak about it. So
Interracial.
yeah, and in terms of the interracial question is really interesting. I wonder about that. Do you have? It seems like you might have some thoughts about it.
Well, I would imagine that probably in England they would be more accepted.
Right.
Yeah, and then among the more progressive abolitionists, I think they would be accepted. But if someone just met them on the street, I would imagine it would be very shocking, right? And that they would get some backlash because of that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you also have the fact that Ellen Craft has been studying the markers of race so carefully since she was a child. Right? People often ask, how did she get so brave when she was performing? How did she have the nerves to do what she did? But when you think about what she had to do as a child, right, and how she had to both perform and study human behavior, and what made her look black, what made her look white, because as a child she needed to look black. Yeah. She needed to appear to be an enslaved person, and she kept failing at that. So I imagine that she'd have both the same skills and the same practice and the same challenges to deal with when she was in the North.
When I was thinking about sort of the money aspect, and reading about William Wells Brown, who was so tight with them, he seemed rather slimy to me. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but he seemed like really exploitative, right? And I don't. You mentioned when we talked a while back about a biography, a really good biography of Brown. So I'm eager to see what other people thought about him.
I'm feeling a little defensive because
Okay.
Brown is like my favorite guy. I've said this before, like I had like an archival crush on
Okay.
William Wells Brown. I'm partial to him because he's such a charmer. I mean, if you meet him on the page, he can, he's very, very compelling.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm always curious because he rubs some people the wrong way. Like I have friends who are like, "Oh my gosh, he's such a mansplainer," but I think what draws me back to him again and again. I had actually these words up on my wall. These words that he spoke to a ladies' anti-slavery society in Rochester when they're asking him, so tell us what slavery was really like, with almost kind of a voyeuristic, right? They're well-meaning, they're well-intentioned, but there is something that feels a little off in the way they're asking him to perform.
Yeah.
And what he says is, if I were to tell you, and I'm paraphrasing here, closely paraphrasing, if I were to tell you what's about slavery as it really was, I would have to take you one at a time and whisper in your ear. Slavery has never been represented. Slavery can never be represented. So no matter what you're hearing, he is, talk about laughter. He has like people just rolling on the floor in these halls. He also, has like a whole room full of people weeping. He can control people with this charisma of his, but he always knows, he always has that experience, and there always is a level of reality to what he's speaking, hard-earned, that for me became a source of like both respect and also interest. Yeah.
Okay. There's a couple. This gentleman.
I'm a historian and also a writer, and I loved your book. And I have a two-part question. I'm wondering if you have a hard time with people trying to put your book into a category of either history or historical fiction, or what is it? And then the second part of the question is, as I was trying to figure out the genre of your book throughout the book, it was obvious to me you'd done tremendous research, but I kept asking, has there been any creative license in here? Is there any place where she made anything up? And the particular place that jumped out at me was the incident where Ellen has escaped from Macon. She's working. Someone, the word has begun to go around that they have found out down in Macon that she escaped.
Mm-hmm.
They tell her, and you say that she waited until she got out the door at work before she cried. Now, that was a great human detail. Do you actually know that? Or was that creative license?
I'm trying to think about the times when she cried. There was a moment where they arrive in Philadelphia and she cries, but I don't believe there was a moment where she cried. And actually, one of the most moving parts is when she and William hear William Wells Brown telling his story. That was a shocker for me, and they're crying as they're listening to his story. So those are two moments where she cried. William also recollects a number of moments where she's crying sort of in protest. There is crying when she is just about to leave the cabin in Macon. But I don't have a single sort of reaction shot, so I'm wondering if there's sort of a convergence in these scenes. Maybe we can look at a page. The former teacher in me is like, let's look at page number. But the larger idea is a really important one, and the question which I appreciate you're asking in terms of genre and also in terms of making things up. And I drew a very strict line for myself about I was not going to cross into fiction. So for a number of reasons, first and foremost, because out of respect to the crafts and to the people who actually really lived this history, it's not my place to make anything up. They have said a lot. They have left enough for us to work with. We can use the reader can use their imaginations, but I wasn't about to invent anything. That was a very firm and fast rule, and that's why the footnote section of the book is so long. And it was hard. I mean, and I fought for those footnotes too, and I suffered. I didn't talk about my writing partner, but I have a wonderful writing partner, Rachel Kauser, who wrote a marvelous book, which you can get from this library, I'm sure. It's called Alexander at the End of the World, and it's about the last years of Alexander the Great. And you might not imagine there are many parallels between Alexander and the Crafts, but actually we were writing about their journeys at the same time and using a lot of the same techniques, including the log line and the screenwriting. So you might find some actually as you read her book. But she, back to the footnotes, was just coaching me through those. And I was, I was doing all kinds. I keep a jar of jelly beans for footnotes to bribe myself, like 1 jelly bean per footnote. I know that seems like really draconian,
No, it's really
but they actually
interesting.
taste so much better when you're only allowed one for every, yeah, it's amazing. Anyhow, the footnotes are there as testament to those who did live this history, and also as an invitation, because we only touched at the surface of the many, gazillion rabbit hole entrances that are possible. And what I wanted to do in those footnotes is to leave room for others to enter. And especially if you open the book, the hardcover has end papers, where you can see all these people who stood up and make us proud, right, up alongside the Crafts. A number of them, many of them, are very little known and need their own books too. So I see, hopefully the book is the start of a conversation not only here, but in larger historical circles, and an opening, hopefully, for more books to be written and more stories to be told.
There was that gentleman there.
Thank you so much for writing this book. And there has to be a film. Maybe you know something, maybe you've heard from somebody, but you're just not saying. But in any case, I expect it. My question is about the theme of Ellen Craft, necessary submission as a woman, the gender politics in the book. You bring it up because it's there on occasion, but it really is not a theme because that's really not the book. But for the time, it obviously was a thing. Did you have any battles with yourself, with your editors, to bring out more of that? She was being held down by William, by her husband. I know you wanted to call it a love story, so it can be a love story, and within the time she was still being held down. Because it seems to me, I was waiting at the end for enough. She becomes a professor of something, Anyway, that's my question.
I think what we call submission is also a kind of performance. And everything that I've seen, so when you're seeing, a lot of what we get is both what they're describing and what others are describing of the Crafts' behaviors, and Ellen's in particular. We can't ever get fully inside of her head, and we can never get fully inside of a marriage. It's just not possible, right? So what I felt like my job was to do was to lay out sort of all of the evidence so you can see and you can make your own judgment about what you think is going on, because, again, I can't say that. Scholarship is a little bit different. There's an argument, and a number of scholars have argued that the Williams silenced Ellen, and that was a big part of it, because there's this whole question of why is she quiet? And one of the things I did discover is that that silence, there's a particular moment where that silence kicks in. So that's one way of trying to understand how and why she stopped speaking. I personally don't think that she was everything else that you see of her, all the private correspondences and snippets of conversations you get, don't indicate that she is a submissive, subservient person. So even if she plays that on the outside, there can be something completely different going on within. And I think you see flashes of that. So there are papers at the Boston Public Library where people are describing some of these conversations. And the one that I love best is, she's sitting at a dinner and somebody's asking, well, how do we know that enslaved people, once if they're free, that they can take care of themselves? And she says, and it's really punchy. I don't have the exact words, but you can find in the book. But she's like, look, right now they're taking care of everybody else and themselves. I would think that they'd be able to take care of themselves, right? That is not, to me, does not come from a lady who is being pushed down, no matter how much she needs, if she's required to play that kind of role on a public stage.
Would you like to see that theme? Is there some way I can make this theme more prevalent in the book?
I think you can discover it for yourself. I mean, you can also go back to the sources. You can look at the articles where she's described. You can look at that letter. Actually, that letter is another. I would say that letter is that moment of standing up, right? She might not say, I'm a professor, but that is really the moment, because they're trying to take away everything from her, including her story. They're saying that she is, the master slave husband wife terms that come up as a refrain, and I highlight that in the other moments. But if you go back, those terms come back in the end, and she's slamming them all down. So that, to me, is that moment of standing up, whether she has a doctor next to her name or not.
We're going to take two more questions, okay? I have one over here.
Comment and a question. I liked how you kicked some dust onto Daniel Webster being a lifetime Massachusetts citizen.
Yeah.
And also, I'm really curious how your book is being received nationally. For me, as a Massachusetts resident, it was very humbling to read this. And how is it being received across the nation with critical race theory and all of what we're up against in the contemporary times?
Thank you. Daniel Webster was really fun to write about, I just have to say. He's more fun than he looks, right? He's got that creepy brow, and he's like all dour. He never smiles, yeah. But yeah, he was a character. I think there should be more done on him too. But in terms of the national reception of this book, I have also been just completely blown away and humbled by how people have embraced the crafts and their story. I guess that's all I can really say. There is the Pulitzer Award, but I've been traveling all across the country. I've been repeatedly to the South. I've been, Georgia, they named it like a book every Georgian ought to read or something like that. I've been to like Mississippi. I just was in Virginia. I just came back from California, and across the board, people seem to be embracing the crafts and all they stood for as Americans. And that really is my hope, is that they're celebrated, that their story is seen as an example of how we're not so divided and how we can make brave choices. And honestly, they, to me, show the greatness of America. And I hope in these times that we can find hope in their story together.
Hi. I was curious. I actually discovered your book before it became the one book for Chelmsford because I'm an MFA student at SNHU, and I'm working on a nonfiction memoir myself. And so I read this as part of my schoolwork for that. And I was curious to know, you touched on it a little bit, but how long did it take you to actually do all of the research for this, because I mean, it impresses me how much you had to dig to follow all of these threads everywhere and then figure out how to tie it all together. And I appreciate the fact that you shared that you wrote a version of it and had to toss it, because I'm like at that point now, because I'm going to be, hopefully, fingers crossed, graduating in June. And so like I'm trying to figure out what am I keeping, what am I getting rid of, and all of that. And so yeah.
Well, first, congratulations, you're almost there. And this is the hardest part, and sometimes it is in the middle of that, all that tossing, that you do find that true line. So it's near there, it's near. It took a long time. I mean, I think I started, I found receipts from like 2011, 2012, when I was first buying books that were the secondary sources that were related to this. It was in 2016 that I really, that's when sort of the big Alice in Wonderland moments happened, when I was doing that archival research, and it felt like the ground was opening up. But I was researching really throughout the writing process. That's another sort of simultaneity that I could not have anticipated. People like it's like Dawn, my editor, is saying you have to have the story running in the present and bringing the past and the present together. Then there's my own past and present, the present of writing where I am, but then also researching at the same time what's going to come later on. And I found that like bewildering as a concept, but actually sort of more doable when I was actually engaged in it. And I think the advice that I would give for that is, I started from the beginning, which is also the middle of the story, but I created these different sort of buckets. So let's say I was researching, at the Boston Public Library, and I was focused on Southern newspapers, but I know that there's going to be a standoff coming, and I find little bits. I have a Boston bucket, and I throw it ahead. And then eventually, when you're throwing enough stuff ahead, that sort of starts breaking down into chapters. And eventually, when it's hardest in the beginning because you're starting with nothing, but once you travel a little further along, and then you receive these buckets, it's like getting presents, like, oh, I forgot about that. So all these like sort of gifts that you're giving to your future self.
Thank you.
Can we do one more?
So it's such an honor to meet you. One of the areas that I work in is to fight against sex and human trafficking. Modern day slavery still exists. What is your reflection as a writer and as an author in comparison to the craft story?
Wow, that is such an important question. I mean, I think one of the reasons why we read history is to both figure out how we are where we are, and also maybe are there lessons that we can take to move forward. And I think that one of the many lessons I would say to learn from this story about the crafts is the importance of telling stories, to amplifying voices. That takes a lot of bravery on the part of the people who have experienced these things, are experiencing them, and also supporters around them. But to amplify those stories so that they're known, so that people know, like, both of the depth of the experience and what we can do. I'd be curious to know more about your work as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I am a human rights ambassador, and I travel the world. I also work in advocacy. I'm also a lawyer as well. So that's why this is part of my platform.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do.
I don't want to put a stop to this, but
it's so good.
what we will do now, thank you so much to everybody. A round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.